The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got. They're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Indeed, that is sunshine streaming through our windows here on Jennifer Street in beautiful northwest Washington, D.C., Friendship Heights. But they're talking about 4 inches of snow overnight. Sorry, kids. No snow day tomorrow. It's a Saturday. I don't really see it coming, but I'm not a weather guy. I guess the temperatures are going to drop dramatically because we're going to push 50 today. I mean, close to 50 degrees. But have some snow to deal with for the weekend. It's supposed to clear out, sometime during the day tomorrow. And by the way, Doug Kammerer and friends, it's the middle of February. It's February 16th. We've had one snow. Wasn't horrible. All this awful snow that you were projecting, getting so excited about as we headed into the winter. So far, I understand we got another month or so, maybe even more than that, 6 weeks, but hadn't happened yet. So this is, you know that commercials are selling for $7 million a piece, 32nd spot in the Super Bowl. Well, it turns out, with the game going to overtime, CBS pocketed an extra $60 million from the commercials in overtime. They have them ready to go, and I guess they check with the advertisers, hey, you want to shell out another $7 million? And who wouldn't in an overtime situation, because nobody's leaving the TV at that point. Discover's overtime commercial with Jennifer Coolidge had aired during the pregame. They aired that again. Arnold Schwarzenegger with State Farm. That's the one he did with Danny DeVito. That's pretty good. That aired again. Beyonce's Verizon commercial that ran during regulation. That ran in overtime. And that's all set up in advance just in case. But between regulation and overtime, CBS brought in nearly $700 million in commercial sales, tickling $1 billion just for one broadcast. And when you think about the bump that you get from overtime, it's almost 10%, right? $700 million, you get an extra $60 million for overtime. Doesn't it bring up some conspiracy thoughts in your mind? Doesn't it lead you in that direction? I think it might. They did that in the Buffalo Wild Wings commercial where somebody hit a switch so you go to overtime so people could eat more wings and drink more beer. It's a money machine. God, the NFL, it's just a money machine. We'll get to Kliff Kingsbury, introduced yesterday as the offensive coordinator for the Commanders, and also Joe Whitt Jr., introduced as the defensive coordinator. We'll hear what he had to say at 10 o'clock. Also, I got another one of those great interviews that have been surfacing, this one with George Brett about his incredible Hall of Fame career with the Kansas City Royals. And also, we'll take a look at the developing situation with the Chicago Bears and what's going to happen with Justin Fields, and will they, in fact, deal the number one pick? Wilbon is all exercised about this. He thinks, people who say Justin Fields is going to be dealt, they don't know anything. They don't know anything. And people around the league are saying, yeah, you're going to have to deal him because there's no way that the Bears can pass up taking Caleb Williams with the number one pick, because last year, they had the opportunity to take C.J. Stroud, who had a tremendous rookie year for the Houston Texans, and they wound up trading away that pick. So you can't whiff twice on potential Hall of Fame quarterbacks, and C.J. Stroud, of course, is a long way from the Hall of Fame. But the jury's still out very much on Justin Fields, so I think you pretty much have to reset the clock with Caleb Williams. And we'll get to more yak about that. Before I get to what Kliff Kingsbury said yesterday, though, Caitlin Clark, I did watch most of her game. I just saw the highlights from last night, but watched her game last weekend when they played at Maryland, and she is just an unbelievable shooter. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but when she set the record last night, when she became the all-time leader in women's college basketball and had a career night of 49 points in their rout of Michigan, she hit a shot that looked like it was about 40 feet. If you're going to set the record, that's the way to do it. And after the buzzer, the fans got T-shirts which said, "You break it, you own it," meaning the record. She is. I got to talk to my friend Brian Maggott about this. Maggott, great shooter, played at Maryland, played at GW, legendary shooter. She might be, in an open gym, the greatest shooter, maybe even as good as, or if not better than Steph Curry. I know that's blasphemy, but I just, you watch her play and you think, God, if nobody's guarding her and she shoots from so far out, nobody comes out to get her. And she gets this quick release, so she's getting her shot off. I don't think you can find a better shooter than Caitlin Clark. Could she play against the men? No. She's too small, and she would have her shots blocked. I understand that. She couldn't play in the NBA. But in terms of just shooting the basketball with nobody guarding you, she might be among the best ever. She is absolutely incredible to watch, and this was kind of nice last night. Angel Reese, remember they had that big dust-up during the national championship game, which, wasn't close. LSU beat Iowa 102-85. By the way, drew a big number on TV. 9.9 million people watched that championship game last April, and the World Series averaged 9.1 million. So 9.9 million for a women's basketball game, 9.1 for a World Series game. But during the game, you saw it as, LSU was pulling away. Reese used the John Cena "You Can't See Me" celebration, and some thought it was disrespectful to her, and she got a lot of hate mail about it, et cetera, et cetera. But she sent out people used to send telegrams. Does anybody even remember what a telegram was? Used to be able to call Western Union, and they would send a congratulatory message to somebody. I got married so long ago, I got a telegram on my honeymoon. But anyway, this was sent out last night by Angel Reese on X, which, of course, used to be Twitter. Congratulations, Caitlin Clark. Keep breaking records and making her story. That's her nickname, her, H-E-R. Reese also added yellow and black hearts and fire emojis to celebrate what is a real milestone. And if you look at the landscape of college basketball right now, people know who Zach Edey is from Purdue. There's a handful of players that fans can identify. But if you ask who is the face of college basketball this year, it's Caitlin Clark. Yeah, and she could come back for another year. And, the question is, with the maximum salary in the WNBA, about $230,000, would it make more sense for her financially to stay in college for another year? And the answer is probably not, because the sponsors are going to stay with her. And the WNBA, that's good. They have that cap and they have that max. But for what she can bring to the league, they may have to rethink that a little bit. If she's on the fence on coming back to Iowa for another year or going to the WNBA, I think the NBA, which owns the WNBA, might start thinking about finding ways you can get other inducements to get her to the WNBA. Maybe it's even sponsorships just tied to her being a professional basketball player. But I've been watching basketball for 60 years. I don't think I've seen a shooter like that. There have been certainly some great shooters. J.J. Redick was a great shooter in college. And we have, and even last night, Klay Thompson had kind of a resurgence, having a tough year. They put him on the bench for the Warriors last night. He came off, he had 35 points. He found his shot. But she is absolutely mesmerizing to watch, and I am not a big fan of women's college basketball. I don't like the game as much as the men's game, but I do like to watch her. All right, to Kliff Kingsbury, and it was funny to see the two coordinators introduced yesterday, because there's been kind of a flip of personalities here. Now, Jack Del Rio was here for almost, or a little more than 3.5 seasons. He got fired at Thanksgiving after yet another debacle against the Cowboys. But even though he had come from television, when he joined the staff under Ron Rivera in 2020, he was, and really was through all the years he was here, pretty low key. And his news conferences every Thursday would go about 10 minutes. And, even when you had Turner, what's his last name already, first name already, Norv's son, when he was here, his news conferences went longer. He wasn't necessarily a fired-up guy. But then last year when they introduced Eric Bieniemy, about this time, maybe a couple of weeks later, he showed up for his opening news conference in a three-piece suit, and he was full of fire. And watching it, you say to yourself, well, why is this guy not gotten a head coaching job yet? He sounds like a head coach. He says all the things that you want to hear. And it turned out, he had some good and some bad in this past year, and now he's out, and maybe he winds up back in Kansas City. I don't know if he'll become an offensive coordinator again, but he was one and done here. And just, you contrast the two, the Jack Del Rio, because they would both speak every Thursday, so you'd have kind of the low-key Jack Del Rio, and then you'd have the fired-up Eric Bieniemy. Now there's been a complete flip. Joe Whitt, who's the defensive coordinator, coming over from Dallas with Dan Quinn, he's that fired-up guy. Wait till you hear what he had to say. We'll get to that at 10 o'clock. Whereas Kliff Kingsbury kind of looked like you woke him up from a nap. He wasn't wearing a three-piece suit yesterday. He was wearing a long-sleeve T-shirt, the logoed Commanders T-shirt, and he's not going to give you a whole lot at these news conferences. That's pretty clear. There's certain things you can find out asking him questions, but if you're looking to be entertained or looking for a real fired-up individual behind the microphone, that's not Kliff Kingsbury. And this was the opening question. How do you feel about coming to the Commanders?
Obviously, historic franchise, incredible fan base, the opportunity to work with Adam Peters, Dan Quinn, who I've always had a ton of respect with, and then the ownership group, what they're trying to do, their vision. It's exciting times. I've heard great things about the DMV, so just honored to be here.
Are you able to provide any sort of clarity on sort of what happened with the Raiders and, how it led to here?
Yeah, I don't want to get into the specifics, but have a tremendous amount of respect for that organization and Mark Davis and AP. Huge fan of his.
How was Magic Johnson involved?
Once again, don't want to get into any of those specifics.
So, he didn't really even try and dance around it. If you're not familiar with this, he was supposedly on his way to joining Antonio Pierce's staff as the offensive coordinator with the Raiders, and then all of a sudden there was a flip, and Pierce was on the Pivot podcast, and he suggested that Magic Johnson had stepped in and basically pulled him away to Washington. So he didn't deny it, but he also didn't address it. So there you go. Take what you want. And look, if Magic did that, that's part of the reason he's here. He's here to make the fans feel good. But he said when they introduced him, he said, look, I'm about winning. I said to Josh Harris, if you want me, you want a guy who wants to win. I'm paraphrasing, but that was what he was about. So if he played a role in getting Kliff Kingsbury here and Kingsbury turns out to be a great offensive coordinator, good job, Magic. You're doing what we want you to do here as a part owner of the team. This was a question about being strictly an offensive guy now. From the interviews I've listened to about him, guys who have covered him in Arizona and even back in Lubbock at Texas Tech, he seems to be more comfortable just focusing on the offense. And problem he had in Arizona, the defense was bad. And they got really bad at the end of the year. They say this is really what he seems to be meant to do, is to coach offense. And what he says about that is
being able to just focus on the offense will be great. Dan has a bunch on his plate. I've sat in that seat, and so you're dealing with the entire picture. With me now, it's focusing on that group and trying to maximize who we are personnel-wise, coaching staff-wise, and being the best we can just in that area. So to be able to back up and do that again is exciting, to put all that focus just into that and ready to get to work.
This is about as funny as it got with Kliff Kingsbury. Doesn't seem to be a barrel of laughs, but, does seem to be very confident in himself. Also, a good-looking guy. As I understand it, when he was coaching at Texas Tech, he was very good with the moms. Like, the moms were kind of smitten with him, and that helped him in recruiting. But this was about quarterback, and it was a question from Scott Abraham of Channel 7, I think designed to kind of shed some light on what they may be looking for in the draft. I mean, are you willing to sell out for Caleb Williams, who he worked with last year at USC, was an assistant at USC and kind of was like the guru for Caleb Williams, but he decided that he would take it in kind of a chuckle direction.
What type of quarterback, like the ideal fit, the characteristics, the traits that you want to work with here in Washington?
The Chiefs quarterback?
That'd help.
No. I do think the game, as you can see, you watch those guys, Brock and him at the end, like when the money's on the table, you got to be able to make some plays with your feet, move around enough to escape a bad play. And it doesn't mean you got to run like Lamar or Kyler Murray, but you better be able to move a little bit and buy yourself some time because the D-line, the rushes, the defense these days are so good. And then the intangibles, you want that player to be the hardest worker on your team. You want him to lead those guys each and every day when he shows up in the building. You want him to lift the building up, and that's why those guys make the type of money they do.
Yeah, he did, of course, coach Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech, but as far as I know, the Chiefs are not going to make him available. Last thing, and both coaches, both Kliff Kingsbury and Joe Whitt, the new defensive coordinator, talked about this, that the staffs that they have put together, the offensive staffs and the defensive staffs, are not what we've had here in the past, where the whole Carolina connection came here with Ron Rivera, people that he was comfortable working with in the past. These are guys from different staffs, and they're from places where the thinking may be a little bit different than what they're used to and who they've coached with. That's because they want to be able to look at all different possibilities and learn all different kinds of offensive and defensive schemes. And so when he was asked about, what he is going to be all about as a coach, he said this.
I don't know what I don't know. I'm not afraid to ask questions and learn from these other guys. And if there's a better way to do it, we're going to do it that way. I'm big on evolving each and every year, doing breakdowns of the top college offenses, pro offense. What are they doing? How can we make that fit? And I think that's what it's about. The defense is always trying to catch up, and it's a cyclical game. And if you kind of are staying stagnant and not progressing and not evolving in your drill work and your scheme and your coaching practice, then they're going to catch up to you.
So honeymoon on, we'll get back to this really by the time we get to minicamp, I guess. There's going to be a lot more talk before the draft and a lot of speculation as to what they're going to do. And we'll get more into what the Bears are doing as they sit with the number one pick in the next hour. All right. Coming up in the next hour, Joe Whitt, the new defensive coordinator for the Commanders, his philosophy, what he says about the kind of team they want to be, all that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. Tony's coming up at 11 o'clock today as we head into a snowy weekend. Looks like we're supposed to get some snow overnight, but shouldn't disrupt your life too much, especially people who don't have to work Saturday. Be surprised, though, the number of people who do work on Saturday. I've worked on Saturday over the years, probably will in the future. It's not always a day off, so there'll be some people who will struggle tomorrow with commutes with you. Been there before, so hang in there with whatever snow we get. But the massive amounts of snow that Doug Kemmerer and his cronies were predicting so far, knock Formica, we're okay in the middle of February. Got a little while before we get out of the woods here, but there is that. Yesterday was Coordinator Introduction Day in Ashburn, so we were introduced to the new offensive coordinator, and I want to make sure that I get the pronunciation of his name right. I got a tweet from Fight the Future, who said that I'm his favorite radio host. Thank you very much. He says, but I can't stand that everyone, not just you, mispronounces Kliff Kingsbury. I guess that's how he wants me to pronounce it. It's spelled Kingbury. And he says people pronounce it Kingsbury. So it must be Kingsbury. And I will try to adhere to that, to pronouncing the name right. We'll get it right as time goes by. I mean, we've struggled, I guess, a little bit with Bilal Coulibaly or Koulibaly. Eventually, if he becomes a star, we'll get it right. I remember when Giannis Antetokounmpo came into the league, and we went, oh, my God, how are we going to handle this? Tua Tagovailoa. Eventually, we learned how to pronounce names. Although, a funny story about, well, you may find it funny. I find it kind of funny. When Tony Dorsett was at Pitt in his senior year, and he was going for the Heisman Trophy, much like when Joe Theismann was at Notre Dame and going for the Heisman Trophy, he changed the pronunciation of his name from Thiesman to Theismann. When Tony Dorsett was going for the Heisman Trophy at Pitt, which he got, Theismann did not in 1971, but 5 years later, Tony Dorsett got it by being a great player, number one, but it probably didn't hurt that he changed the pronunciation to Dorsett. Well, Tom Landry, who drafted him and made him a star into the Cowboys Hall of Fame running back, wasn't into that kind of stuff. So all the years that Landry coached him, and he coached him for, the first came in 1977, and Landry stayed on the job through 80. Yes, all of his years in Dallas. He was traded to Denver like in the mid 80s or 86, something like that. But all those years that he was in Dallas, Tom Landry never called him Dorsett. He called him Tony Dorsett. So it's just now in the case of Kingsbury, it is the actual spelling with a U instead of an E. But it's, I guess, maybe it's my accent, maybe it's, this part of the country, whatever. I'm prone to call him Kingsbury, but it's Kingsbury. We do know how to pronounce the last name of the defensive coordinator. That's Joe Whitt, and Joe Whitt Jr. He talked about his dad, who was a pretty hard-nosed coach, as we find out, and Joe Whitt Jr. has paid his dues to get to the point now where he is getting his shot as a defensive coordinator. And introduced yesterday, he was asked about getting this opportunity and how he feels about it to get it in Washington.
First off, I'm excited to be here. All right, this is one of the teams that you think about as you're growing up. They won all the Super Bowls as I was growing up, and having the opportunity to be here at Washington is exciting. To be here with Coach Quinn is exciting. You're going to see a man that's going to energize the whole city, not just this football team, the whole fan base. And so my opportunity to be a DC, I've been waiting for this for a long time. All right, the staff that we put together is an outstanding staff. We have a lot of coaches that come from different trees, and we did that by design because we want to have ideas outside of what necessarily I've done in my past. So we're ready for it. Like I said, it's just going to be exciting times.
Obviously, you have ties to Dan, but why do you feel maybe you're ready for this now?
That's a funny question to me. I've been coaching in the league for 18 years, okay? I see a lot of these young guys get opportunities years prior, and nobody really questioned them, you know what I'm saying? I've been ready, and just the opportunity now has come with Coach Quinn. But a question of my ability to call defense, to structure a defense, to do that, I have full confidence in that.
So he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, not a bad thing. He said he thought he was ready to be a defensive coordinator 9 years ago. So halfway through his run of 18 years of coaching in the league, thought he was ready and had to wait another 9 years to get this chance. His specialty is the secondary. Secondary was a mess here last season, so that's something that he's got to shore up. But he's got definite ideas, and he said something about the style of the way this team is going to play. I know my good friend Doc Walker, who I've known for 30 years. I know in listening to this, Doc got really excited to hear this. This is Joe Whitt, the defensive coordinator, on the type of style that the Commanders are going to play.
The way that we live is not for everybody, okay? It's not, all right? Because we're going to run and put our bodies on people in a violent manner, all right? And so we're going to get that play style right first, right? And then the structure of what we do doesn't really matter, 3-4, 4-3. Everybody really plays the same coverages to some point. All right. The structure doesn't matter to me. The main thing that matters to me is, are we going to be arriving violently? All right, and we're going to turn the ball over. All right, we're going to make sure we disrupt these quarterbacks.
That's a T-shirt, right? It's got to be a T-shirt. We're going to put our bodies on other people in a violent manner. That's right there. Now, in this day and age where you breathe on the quarterback and you get roughing the passer, I'm not so sure that's something you want to say, because the referees are going to hear that and they're going to be looking for it. So maybe it's the other 10 guys. I know that hard hitting is a style. It's just the way that it's called in the NFL, particularly when it comes to quarterbacks, makes it difficult to do. This is his overall coaching style? What kind of style is he going to have as he coaches his players?
I'm not really a rah-rah guy, okay, especially on game day. I believe if you're doing a lot of yelling on game day, you haven't done your job during the week. All right, a game day is for helping the players, teaching the players, putting them in a great position. Now, at practice, all right, we're going to make sure we get them going the right way. So you'll see a big difference between me on the practice field and on game day. On game day, it's all about helping those guys, getting them in the right position because they're trying their butts off, all right? They're not trying to mess up, trust and believe, all right? So I want to make sure that we put them in a great position that they can go out there and play fast.
So he is, and he looks like, just from the news conferences, he's going to be the defensive version of Eric Bieniemy during the week. But when the game comes, he's going to be coaching in a different style, which makes sense. I mean, the guys that you used to see yelling and screaming on the sidelines, you don't really see that anymore. It's much more about concentrating on your job and so forth and so on. But he does appear to be the much fiery of the two between he and Kingsbury, who seems to be very analytical and very composed and, kind of cool, right? Kind of cool and collected. Whitt doesn't really seem that way. When you coach defense, it's all about the quarterback. Now, as Al Davis used to say, the quarterback has to go down and he has to go down hard. That's not what you can do anymore with roughing the passer, but you also, in the mental part of the game, and this is what makes the greats of the greats, Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes and Peyton Manning, they could come to the line of scrimmage and they could spot what you're doing defensively right away and make all the adjustments. So as a defensive guy, he's got to get his guys up to the line of scrimmage and have the quarterback not necessarily know what they're going to do.
Everything that we're going to try to do starts with the quarterback, all right? We want to make that quarterback play post-snap as much as possible. These quarterbacks are too good. So if you allow them to see the structure that you're lined up in and tell them the truth with it, and so they know the coverage or they know where the pressure is coming from, it's going to be a difficult day for you. So as much as possible, what we've done in Dallas from a disguise standpoint and a pressure standpoint is trying to make that quarterback play post-snap, and now the rushing coverage, which is always a good marriage, they can come to life together. And so that's what we're going to try to do. That's why we've had success in not only my time in Dallas, but in Green Bay, that stretch. We're known for turning the ball over, and that's what we're going to do here.
And being known for turning the ball over, is that something you can teach, or is some of that just the way balls bounce on game day? How can you get this group, because they kind of tried to do that in the past, and it hasn't really come to fruition? Well,
I mean, you can coach it some. The first thing is you have to have players that can catch the ball, okay? That's the number one thing, and that might sound simplistic, but that's the truth. Once you get quarterbacks playing post-snap, all right, they're making errant throws. Most interceptions aren't on good thrown balls. They're on tips and overthrows. They're on inside hip throws, on outside breakers. Now, when you have those opportunities on those plays, you got to make them. All right, you gotta bring the ball to life, and you'll hear me talk about this all the time. The ball is life, all right, and so it's like air, and we gotta have it. We gotta get it. Most drills that you see us on the field will end with some kind of guy catching the ball, picking the ball off a fumble. Just understanding that how to get the ball out from a punch, a rake, or what have you. We're going to attack the ball every kind of way we can in practice so it translates into the game.
Okay. Now, there's a problem here. Not a huge problem, but I go back to what Lovie Smith said when he was the head coach of the Bears the last time they went to the Super Bowl, and they went there with Rex Grossman. I mean, when we look back in time, and we say, "You're kidding me." They got to the Super Bowl with Rex Grossman. Yes, they did. They were good enough defensively, and they had Devin Hester as the greatest kick returner of all time, now in the Hall of Fame, or going in the Hall of Fame this year. So that had a lot to do with it. But what I'll never forget what Lovie Smith said, and it's so true. He said he didn't mind Rex Grossman trying to force it into tight windows, as we saw here when he played here a few years later. That's what he did. He was always trying to force the ball, and he got interceptions all the time. And Lovie Smith said he didn't mind his quarterback throwing into coverage, he said, because those guys who are playing defensive back, they're playing that position because they couldn't catch. And you think about if you played like high school football, the first day when you'd have tryouts, or even when the roster was set and players choosing positions, all the fast guys wanted to play wide receiver. And if they could catch the ball, they played wide receiver. If they dropped it, they went and played defensive back. So that made sense. Look, Washington took Carlos Rogers in the first round in, I think it was 2005. And he was a really good cover corner. But he couldn't catch the damn ball. He had hands of stone. They had a playoff game where he had a pick six in his hands and he dropped it. So it's great if Joe Whitt can get defensive backs who can catch the ball, but you got to realize they're playing defensive back because someone along the line identified him as someone who couldn't catch. Because if you can catch, you can be much bigger for the team as a wide receiver. And wide receivers make more money than there are some great defensive backs, of course, but the celebrated players are the wide receivers, and the fast guys want to play wide receiver. They don't want to play defensive back. So that's going to be something that if he can pull that off, mazel tov on that. But that's not going to be as easy as it sounds. The other question about coming here, this is a guy who's been with Dan Quinn now, and this will be his third stop. They were together in Atlanta, and they were together just recently in Dallas, and now they're coming here. And this is what Joe Whitt says about working under Dan Quinn.
He's just the best human being that I've probably been around in football, okay? Take the football coach out of it. He's a really good person. When I get to Atlanta and I have to move my family down, he writes handwritten notes to my kids. I've never had a head coach do that. All right, my son was struggling in football with a certain block blitzing scheme, and he takes time out of his day to put a video of Michael Parsons rushing on a tackle from practice to help my son rush on the tackle in his practice. That's what type of dude this is. All right, so I'm all in with him, 100%. And then as a coach, he allows you to be creative. He wants you to think outside of the box. He wants you to going into last year, this offseason, the last 2 years in a row prior to that, 21 and 22, we were the number one team in the league for 2 years in a row in turnovers. You know what the first thing he told me to do? Joe, how can we get more turnovers? I want you to research, how do you get more turnovers? Because the ball is life. All right, so he's always trying to make you level up and give you the ability to think outside of the box and do it. He doesn't want to just say, hey, that's the way we've already done it. And I'm a believer, too. If I ask you a question and you say, hey, that's the way I've always done it, it can be changed, all right, because that's not a very good answer. All right, so we're going to always try to find a way to get better and level up and think outside of the box because that's what these offenses are doing. All right, these motions and these shifts and these formations that these guys are doing that's coming from the college game, if you don't think it's outside of the box, you will fall short. And so we will be innovative in that way.
And another T-shirt, ball is life, right? Air. Ball is like air. Ball is life. Yeah, that's definitely. He ought to trademark that as well as his philosophy on defense that he's going to put bodies on other people in a violent way. Those are too sure to be bestsellers, and somebody ought to jump on that out at Ashburn. Last thing is how he's going to approach his players, and he said something I think very interesting here regarding the time spent coaching. He's got 3 kids, and he mentioned, I don't really have any hobbies. He said, my time away from football is spent with my family. So he said this about coaching, and it kind of flies in the face of the things that were so much celebrated about Joe Gibbs and others, but this is Joe Whitt's approach as the defensive coordinator.
They're going to see the same person every day. You can't pick and choose when you want to demand or get things from guys. Every time I walk into that building, they're going to see the same thing. They're going to get the same effort. I tell you one thing, and this is a little bit trying to answer your question. As coaches, when you start to lose sometimes, coaches start to stay later. And my thought process is because I don't care if we won. I've been on 20 wins in a row, and I've lost 6 in a row, okay? I go home the same time because I'm giving you everything I have. Everything I have every time. So when coaches started to stay later after we've lost 2 or 3 games, man, you were cheating us. Because if you thought that was going to give us a better chance of winning, you would have done it before we lost. So to answer your question is, I'm going to give everything I have to those guys every time they see me, all right? and then I can sleep well at night after that.
Okay. All right. Yeah, look, Joe Gibbs, Hall of Fame, slept in his office 3 nights a week. And there are ex-players who will tell you, I might want to get into coaching, but I can't put in all those hours. And it's such a grind for the NFL season, but that's his philosophy, and it's obviously gotten him to the point where he's now the defensive coordinator, and he's fun to listen to. He's got the energy, that's for sure. Joe Whitt, Kliff Kingsbury, a little bit different in that regard, but I think it's an upgrade at both spots with the two of them introduced as the coordinators. But up next, another one of those terrific interviews that have surfaced, this one with George Brett, Hall of Famer George Brett, including flirting with 400, the hemorrhoid story, and, of course, the Pine Tar game. All that still ahead as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
We got a Tony show on this Friday. We got snow in the forecast, and in the next hour, we'll hear from Joe Whitt, the new defensive coordinator of the Commanders. Wanted to play this from, I guess it came up a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago. The interview that George Brett did several years ago with I believe it's Joe Buck. I haven't even listened to this in a while, so it's either Joe Buck or Dan Patrick. But we go through the highlights of all these athletes and coaches' careers, and they're really fascinating to listen to. So I like to pull out, the big parts that I find interesting from these about hour interviews, 50 minutes, 55 minutes, whatever it is. And so this is how George Brett started out. He had a brother who was a really good player in the major leagues. Ken Brett had a good pitching career and was considered to be the best athlete of the brothers. But there were 4 of them, 4 brothers. George Brett was the youngest. And as he said here, that led to him being, of course, picked on, but probably helped him as he made his way up through his career.
My father always compared me to all 3 of my brothers. My brother John was a tough guy, street fighter, but loved the game of baseball. My brother Ken might have been one of the best athletes ever to come out of Southern California. Was drafted number 1 by the Boston Red Sox in 1966 out of high school. And the next year was pitching in the World Series. Youngest pitcher ever to pitch in a World Series game. 1 year out of high school. And my brother Bobby was a good baseball player, a good basketball player. And my dad always compared me to them. You're not as tough as your brother John. You're not as good a fielder as your brother John. You don't hit as good as your brother Ken. You play basketball like a girl compared to your brother Bobby. Bobby's a better baseball player than you, and I was always compared to him. And all I ever wanted was for my dad to say, you're going to be good someday. But I never got that, Dan. I never got it. And I remember when we were kids, we would go to a field, and we always had a bunch of baseballs around the house. And we had a dog, and the dog would chew them up a little bit, and we would go hit. My brother John would pitch to my brother Ken. My brother Ken would pitch to my brother John, and then they'd pitch to my brother Bobby. And you know what my job was?
Shagging.
I shagged. Then all of a sudden, it was time to go to the beach because we grew up half a mile from the ocean in El Segundo. I never got to hit. All I did was shag. And they made me count the balls. We'd go out there with 18. We couldn't leave unless we went home with 18. And so they're all over the place. I'm just running out trying to get it. Hey, it's my turn to hit. No, it's not. You're not hitting today. We're going to the beach.
So from the picked-on little brother, George Brett rose through the ranks, made it to the Kansas City Royals, and early in his career was flirting with 400. And here's why he says he didn't quite get there.
All of a sudden, Dan, it just started snowballing. I don't know what I was hitting at the All-Star break, maybe 340, 350, and all of a sudden, I think I had a stretch of 6 games in a row where I had 3 or more hits, and I think I had a 4-hit and a 5-hit game in there, so maybe 20 hits in a week. That's a good month for some people, and the average just skyrocketed, and I'll never forget, there's 6 weeks to go in the season, and I get the average. I get a bases-loaded double in the 9th inning, or the 8th inning, off pitcher for Toronto, and the average goes to 401. 6 weeks to go in the season, and all of a sudden, all these reporters from nowhere show up, and they go, hey, can you hit 400? And I'm going, yeah, right. There's 6 weeks to go in the season. I'm swinging the bat good. I'm seeing the ball good. And as a result, I'm getting hits, and the average has climbed. little did I know that for the next 6 weeks or 4 weeks, I was over 400. Now I'm going to the last 2 weeks of the season trying to become the first player to hit 400 since Ted Williams in 1941. And all of a sudden, and I'm pretty relaxed through this whole thing. And all of a sudden, after talking about this magical number, 400, for a solid month, it's like, God, this is kind of important. I want to do this.
Well, to set this up, you have the campaign trail with Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter.
Mm-hmm.
We have a Cold War going on with Russia. We got the Iranian hostage crisis going on. People want something positive here. And you were that beacon of light that maybe we were going to see a magical run of 400 here.
Yeah. All of a sudden, now I went out and it became important, where before it wasn't important. When I was over 400, it was easy. You go 1 for 4, you're still over 400. You go 0 for 3, you might still be over 400. But when you're under 400 and you go 1 for 4, you're dropping, and you're dropping fast.
You guys are playing at a really high level. You guys are winning your division. So the games there in the last couple of weeks aren't meaningful games. If you're in a pennant battle, if it's coming down to the wire, do you think that would have helped you a little bit more?
Yeah, definitely, because we had a 17-game lead.
Yeah.
All the attention wasn't on if the Royals won or lost. It was all on how many hits George Brett got. So all of a sudden, I get down to about 395, and I'm going, oh, my God. I got to go 5 for 5. And then I went out and tried to, I just started trying too hard. I didn't let it happen. I tried to make it happen. I got down to 383. Everybody leaves. There's 5 games to go in the season. I hit 500 the last week to get it up to 390. But it was a magical run. I was 27 years old, in the prime of my life. Come home for Thanksgiving, the first thing my dad says to me, you mean to tell me you couldn't have got 5 more damn hits? First thing he said, walk in the door. How's that?
All you did was bat 390.
390, I'm sorry, Dad. And he said, that's less than 1 hit a month, by the way.
How did it make you? How's it make you feel?
I laughed right in his face, yeah.
So at this point,
I said, I'm sorry, Dad, I only hit 390.
But he had to be proud of you. You batted 390.
Yeah, I know.
But it felt like there was more to push. He
always told me that Ted Williams was the best hitter he ever saw. And so I think he wanted me to do what Ted Williams did.
Well, that was a different era. The baseball was all white at that point. Ted Williams hit 406 in 1941. The color line wasn't broken until 1947. So it was different when George Brett was doing it. Interesting that his father said that. I think of Barry Sanders, as great a running back as he was. His father said the best running back was Jim Brown, not Barry Sanders, on that. And also where he's talking about what it's like to deal with the media pressure every day, everybody asking him about hitting 400. A couple years earlier, Pete Rose went after Joe DiMaggio. He came up short. He got to 44 consecutive games. But the more he talked about it, the better he liked it. He loved the attention that he got from that streak. In fact, I think Tony's talked about this. Tony was a reporter at that time, either New York Times or Newsday, and he was part of the pack that was following Rose around as he was attempting to break the record. So wherever they stopped, reporters were there covering the game, and Rose liked talking to the media. And I don't know if George disliked it, but what he's saying is it caused him to think about it more, and that's what led him to hit 390 instead of 400. 390 is still pretty damn good. And as his father said, hey, 5 more hits. You couldn't get 5 more hits. This is probably the most famous incident. No, this is the second most famous. I'll get to the most famous in a moment. This is during the World Series. And he comes up with a bit of a problem. It's the wrong time for this problem to surface. Some of us have dealt with it in the past, but it doesn't become public. But as you hear Dan Patrick and George Brett discuss this, it became public.
So you lose the first 2. You leave during the second game.
Yeah, I stayed, but I left. I came out of the game. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So? Have you ever had them?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. we were winning like 5-2 or something, and it was the 7th inning, and I had a really, really, really painful case of internal hemorrhoids, and external also, and so they decided to take me out of the game. And I remember talking to my dad afterwards. He said, "Jesus, you got hemorrhoids? How do you have hemorrhoids? You couldn't play with hemorrhoids." I'm saying, "Dad, I played. I'm going to play the next day." It was just ridiculous where you couldn't concentrate on anything but that. You know, you have so much pain, and so they took me out of the game. Fast forward about 15 years. I'm talking to one of my brothers, and sure enough, he said, "Have you talked to Dad lately?" I said, "I haven't talked to him in about a week. Why?" "He's in the hospital." And I go, "In the hospital? What's wrong?" "He's got hemorrhoids." I said, "Give me the number. Give me the number. He's at Daniel Freeman Hospital in Inglewood. Give me the number." He answers the phone. "Hello." I said, "Hey, Dad, George." "Yeah, what do you want?" I said, "How the hell? I didn't even spend the night in the hospital when I had my hemorrhoids taken out." He said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I never knew." I said, "Dad, you don't even have to slide. You don't have to run. You don't have to do anything. Try playing and sliding and running and all the stuff that I had to do as a baseball player. All you have to do is sit on the couch and watch TV, and you couldn't even do that." So I got back at him a little bit.
The national reaction to it, though.
It was embarrassing.
Yes.
It was real embarrassing. Every on-deck circle I went to for the next 3 years on the road, I mean, I heard every hemorrhoid joke there was, you know, and it's, after a while it gets old, and I was never one, Dan, if a fan yelled, you know, something at me, I never turned around and acknowledged them.
How distracting was it to try to play?
It was distracting. I mean, it was just, you're out there and you're saying, okay, this guy's gonna hit me, and you're thinking, God, my ass hurts. God, my ass, you know, man, oh man, what is that? You know, and so it's best to come out of the game.
Yeah, and they did not win that World Series in 1980. That was the Philadelphia Phillies who beat the Royals for that World Championship, and whether or not the hemorrhoids played a role, who knows? But yes, that is something that was attached to him for the rest of his career. But this is his most famous moment. It was not in a World Series game. It was in a regular season game at Yankee Stadium. It's known as the Pine Tar game, and it's when he was thrown out of a game because the umpire ruled that he had too much pine tar on his bat. That was later overturned, but it was an enormous story, partly because it was in New York, and partly, maybe mainly, because of the incredible way that he came flying out of the dugout to protest the bat being thrown out and he being thrown out and the home run overruled. So this is Brett with Dan Patrick, his recollections of the Pine Tar game in 1983.
Any idea going into that game that there's any suspicions about your bat?
No, none whatsoever. I had used that bat. It was one of the best bats I have ever gotten. I think it was a 9-grainer, which there's only 9 grains going through the whole bat, and that bat was hard. And I bet I used that bat for over a month. Well, you put pine tar on a bat for a month, it's gonna start bleeding into the wood, and the levels, you know, it's just gonna start building up. And I had no idea, Dan, in all honesty, that bat was illegal, and that's why I never did anything about it.
This is how it played out with the Pine Tar game at Yankee Stadium.
The pitch deep to right field. Holy cow, I don't believe it. Home run for George Brett. And Billy Martin now is coming out. He wants to take a look at that bat. And if he wins this, there will be chaos. Do you remember that?
Oh, I can't believe that.
Wait a minute, Bill.
I can't believe that.
They did that to Thurman Munson out in Minnesota.
Brett is upset, and I can't believe that, Phil. I can't believe they'd call Brett out here.
He is called out, and the Yankees win the game 4-3, but it's one of the most unbelievable endings I have ever seen.
Unbelievable ending is right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess word was that Nettles and Billy Martin saw this earlier in the season. They looked at the bat.
We played the Yankees 2 weeks prior to that,
Okay.
and the bat, Greg Nettles said, hey, God, he's got so much pine tar on that bat, I think it's an illegal bat. I didn't do anything in that series to affect the outcome of the game. You know, if you get a single in the third inning with 2 outs, they don't care. They were waiting for something in the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning that might change the outcome. So they didn't say a word. And then sure enough, 2 weeks later, I got the same bat, and it's got, 14 more days of pine tar built up on that thing. And so we go in there, and that was the last game of the series. And then in the 9th inning, 2 outs in the 9th inning, we're down by a run or two, and then I hit that home run. And they said, I think that's going to affect the outcome of this game. Let's go out and challenge it now. And that's what they did. And God, it was crazy because I have never heard of that happening before.
Yeah, you go back and you look at that, and it's amazing because then they have to have a redo. They have to pick up the game.
Yeah, and can you believe they kicked me out of the game?
So you can't play.
They kicked me out of the game.
Okay, so they allow the home run,
right?
But you're not allowed to play in the resumption of that game.
Right, because I got kicked out because of yelling at the umpires.
Did you get fined?
No, never got fined. 20 years in baseball, never got fined.
Do you even recognize, like, you played with passion?
Yeah.
But who is that guy, though?
Let me ask you guys an informal question. Would you rather be remembered as that incident right there, or would you rather be remembered as the guy that had to come out of 3 innings of a game in the World Series because of hemorrhoids? What would you rather be remembered for? Right?
You're right.
It's the greatest thing that ever happened to my life. It is. Now, sometimes I have to remind people, hey, I was the hemorrhoid guy too.
So that wiped that away. No pun intended.
Oh, by far. By far, yeah.
Yeah. Pine tar, hemorrhoids. Yeah, I'd take the pine tar too. Last thing, his career ended in 1994, so that's 30 years ago. Wow. And here is how he came to the conclusion that he did win a World Series in 1985, although it was partly on a really bad call by Don Deckinger, but he did get his ring in 1985, and by 1994, he was ready to call it a career, as he recalled to Dan Patrick.
Did you know it was time?
All of a sudden, wins didn't feel that good and losses didn't feel that bad. And that's when I knew it was time to retire. Led the team in home runs and RBIs my last year, and just decided, you know what, I'm not going to put myself through this another year. 20 years is enough. Playing Major League Baseball, and the travel at the time was getting to me too. I think the older you get, I was 40 years old when I retired, but getting into cities at 3 in the morning and then having to play the next day, so it was just time.
1999, you go into the Hall of Fame with Nolan Ryan, Robin Yount, and you get 98.2% of the votes. So one of the highest vote totals.
Yeah, and I know when the people here that know baseball know I'm not the 4th best player ever to get voted, but you know what I think happened? I think the sports writers that covered the era which I played in, they saw the desire, they saw the love, they saw the determination, they saw the pine tar emotion. They saw a guy that stretched singles into doubles, doubles into triples, a guy that spent one whole career with one team, and they all thought that was appealing, so I'll give him a vote, But I know, and all the guys I played against, no, I'm not the top 4 players.
How about that, though? Going in with Robin Yount, who spent his entire career with the Milwaukee Brewers, playing shortstop. George Brett, entire career with the Royals, playing third base. Nolan Ryan moved around a lot, but those 3 guys going into the Hall of Fame, and the fact that Brett was almost unanimous, as the other 2 should have been as well. But really, really remarkable, and a great career, and tells it well, right? Tells a good story about his career. As far as the weekend goes, boy, without the Super Bowl, we did have the dead weekend in between the championship games and the Super Bowl. But it's getting sparse. We got Maryland basketball tomorrow. We've got Virginia will be here on ESPN 6:30. And the All-Star game, which used to be very exciting, used to really look forward to the NBA All-Star game, it has become unwatchable. And it's going to be played, supposed to tip off at 8 o'clock on Sunday night. I guess it's on TNT. But they've got to do something about it, or just get rid of it, because and even we had Doc Rivers, the new coach of the Bucs last night, saying that he thought his players had their minds in Cabo. That even the guys who I guess are headed off to Indianapolis are not really even interested in playing, and because as soon as it's over, they're going to get 3 days off and they're going to hightail it out of Indy, wherever they're going to go, before they have to get back onto the court. All right, that's a wrap for me. Tony is coming up next. Have a great weekend, and I will see you back here on Monday at 9 a.m.